Hi guys, I am going to do a short video today to talk about chapter 1, what is psychology. So I'm going to share my screen. See what we got here. Okay. All right. So what we are dealing with right now is a situation where you have quite a lot of PowerPoint slides to go through, and I am not going to go through all of them. I am just going to pick out a few that I think are really important to discuss. So let's get started. We're going to start on slide 25. It is a slide about behaviorism. And what I want to talk about on this slide is the behaviorist view, and also a little bit about how that differs from social cognitive theorists. Okay, so there are some things about behaviorism that are important to understand that people usually get wrong. And what that is about reinforcement versus punishment, and what those actually mean. So reinforcement is anything that happens after a behavior that serves to increase the chance that the behavior will occur again. So, if you ask your dog to sit and the dog sits and you give the dog a treat, that is reinforcement. Okay, so there's also punishment, and punishment is anything that happens after a behavior that is designed to decrease the chance that it will happen again. So if your dog jumps on the couch and you say no and pull him off the couch, that is a punishment. I think that there's a lot of baggage around the words punishment and reinforcement less, but mostly punishment, because it has a very negative connotation. But really, in terms of behaviorism, there is no negative connotation to that word. All it means is that it is meant to decrease the chance that that behavior will happen again. That's all it means. So both reinforcement and punishment come in two versions, positive and negative. And again, these don't have value connotations to them. They just strictly describe a type of reinforcement and a type of punishment. So negative reinforcement is something that you remove in order to get the behavior to occur again. So let's say that your dog is standing somewhere, you want your dog to move over. You push them and then they move over, and you remove the pressure to reward them for moving over. Then what you've done is you've negatively reinforced that behavior. So you've removed something, the pressure, in order to ensure that the behavior occurs again. So theoretically, next time you just put your hand on their side to move over, much less pressure, and they do it again. So that is negative reinforcement. So you are ensuring or trying to ensure that the behavior repeats by taking something away. Positive reinforcement is much easier to wrap your head around. So like that's the example that I gave before. The dog does something you want it to do, you give it a treat. So you've added something to the situation in order to help them understand that they're supposed to repeat the behavior. So like I said, punishment also comes in positive and negative. I am going to leave that for the discussion. I'm going to create a discussion about that, and I'm going to ask you about examples of positive and negative punishment, because I do think that this is a sort of complicated topic, and I think it's good to talk about instead of just be spoken at about it. So I'm just going to leave that one there for now and move on to social cognitive theories. So in behaviorism, there is no real space for contemplating what's going on. It's just purely cause and effect. You do something, the organism does something else in response to that. They don't sit around and think about what's going on, they just do it. For cognitive theorists, it works very differently. It's something about how there is a thought process to everything that goes on that makes behavior more or less likely to occur. And I think that there is a place in the world for both types of learning theory. I think that cognitive theories work very well for, sort of developmentally normal or on target people, animals, whatever. I think that it works less well when you're talking about, say, very young babies or like lizards or, animals that don't have a lot of capacity, that sort of thing. So like, most animals are not sitting around thinking about what's going on. They're just sort of reacting. But most of them have some capacity for this. However, you'll find that the behavioral theories work best applied to animals, and social cognitive behavioral theories work best when you apply them to mature adult human beings, and to some extent to children, but it kind of depends on their developmental stage and that sort of thing. So that is what I wanted to cover on that slide. So the next slide that I want to talk about is slide 34. I'm not going to talk about the sample types here. I think that you can look at those in your book and kind of understand the details on those, though of course you can always ask me questions or ask your colleagues questions in the Canvas. But what I do want to talk about a little bit is volunteer bias, because I feel like that's something that we don't pay enough attention to, and we need to spend a lot more time paying attention to. So volunteer bias. When you go to a research university, so, a four-year university where the professors do research in addition to teaching, that sort of thing, a lot of times when they are recruiting subjects, they're recruiting from their classes, So when I was in the equivalent of this class, I was at a four-year research institution, and it was required of us that we participate in a certain number of research studies to get through the class. And that's really, really common, is that students are required to participate so that, the professors have a pool of subjects to work with. Well, there's a pretty obvious problem with that, which is that, like, the sample that you're dealing with in a, Psych 100 class at a four-year university is definitely not representative of the entire population. So when you are thinking about how generalizable the results of any one particular study are to the whole population, you have to think about the differences between the general population and the population that's being tested. And often when you read the research directly, it will say something about this, about whether the subject pool is representative of the larger population or not, that sort of thing. But this is always something that you should think about. Okay, So that's what I wanted to touch on there. And this is something else. So this is slide 39. And what I want to talk about on this slide, couple of things. I'm not going to talk too much about independent and dependent variables, but it is really, really, really important that you understand the difference between these two things. So make sure that you review it in your book and that you ask questions if you're not really sure what the difference is. I will say very briefly that the dependent variable is the thing that changes based on the independent variable. So whatever comes first, whatever thing is being set and then changed is the independent variable. I know that's complicated, but if you think about it, it makes sense. So whatever the thing is, if it's, the genetic structure of an individual person, like we have whatever genetic makeup that we have, and then we have our height, right? So the independent variable there is the genetic structure. So that's the thing that you can change and manipulate to see what the outcome is. So for me, I'm 5'3" and a little bit of change, like that is something that isn't going to depend on anything except, my genetic structure and a little bit of environment and that sort of thing. It can be very confusing to think about which is the independent variable and which is the dependent variable. But it's kind of important to understand what is being measured and what is being manipulated. So that might not have been the clearest explanation, but if it doesn't make sense, feel free to ask about it in Canvas. Okay, so the thing I actually really wanted to discuss on this slide was placebos. So I am not super happy with how the materials for your book discuss placebos. And so what I want to underline here is that the placebo effect is important. So placebos are theoretically something that has no real impact. So, if you're in a blind study and one person gets a Tylenol and somebody else gets a sugar pill and you're told that both are painkillers, you're very likely to end up in a situation where the person who got the sugar pill, which in theory shouldn't have anything to do with pain relief, is experiencing the same amount of pain relief as the person who got the Tylenol. That is a well-established effect. It is real, it happens. Placebos do have an impact on well-being. The question is whether the whether the treatment is more effective than the placebo. That is the question when you're doing a blind study. So, if you find that the person who took the placebo and the person who took the treatment have the same amount of pain relief, then the treatment isn't very helpful, right? So the treatment is the same as taking a sugar pill and just being told this is a pain relief. Then you're not going to go very far with that drug trial, for example. So I just wanted to underline why placebos are important. And placebos, absolutely, that is a real effect. That is something that actually occurs. So if you want to run an experiment of your own, the next time your mom or partner or child or whatever says that they have a headache and you happen to have a sugar pill on hand, instead of giving them the Tylenol, give them the sugar pill and see how they're feeling in half an hour. I would be very surprised if they didn't say that their headache was feeling better. Okay, so that's all I wanted to talk about with this chapter. I do want to make sure that you understand that just because these are the things that I've decided to underline and to discuss That does not by any means mean that these are the only important things, or even that these are the things that are going to pop up on your exam. They may not. But I just want to kind of underline those things because they either weren't clear enough or there was some nuance that I wanted to make sure that you had. Okay, so hopefully that was helpful. If it wasn't, please let me know in the Canvas platform. Thank you.